You're listening to The First Question with Paul Hendrick, brought to you by Ballistic Sports. Follow Ballistic Sports on Twitter @Ballistic Sports. Our guest today is a self-described hockey lifer. As a player, he'd twice win the Memorial Cup. As a head coach, he's won a Calder Cup and a Kelly Cup. As a player and coach, he has played a role in well north of 2,000 games. Bruce Boudreau is a former NHL Coach of the Year and can trace his hockey roots back to Toronto and old George Bell Arena. His parents named him Bruce back in 1955, but in hockey circles, he's simply known as Gabby. And Gabby, credit's given where credit is due. Take us back to your days with the Marley organization and that great juvenile team and how the nickname Gabby found its origins.
Well, it's pretty interesting. I mean, the juvenile team was great. I think we were 44-0 during the season and pretty well won everything. I mean, there was some really future great NHL players on that team. And when I say juvenile, juvenile was usually, it's a U18 team now, but we were all 15 and 16-year-olds playing up. And so it was, I mean, I think the three centers were Dennis Marook, Wayne Dillon, and myself on that team. So we felt we were pretty good. Anyway, at the end of the season, if you know Toronto, I mean, back in 1968 or whenever it was, once you left your team, because you drew from everywhere, I mean, we all went to junior B camp in Markham the next year, and I hadn't seen the guys since late March or early April when we won it all. So, I mean, they're your friends, but you only had landlines and you didn't have cars. We weren't driving. So we just sort of hung up, and back in those days, you just hung out in your neighborhood with your buddies in your neighborhood. So I just kept talking and interrupting the coach when he's trying to do meetings. And eventually the trainer, whose name was Pat Riley, said, "God, you're a Gabby something or so." And the players laughed, and on the ice, the same thing happened. They'd be doing drills, and I'd be talking to guys, and the coach ended up saying, "Shut up, you Gabby so-and-so," and it just caught. And, we all stayed on the junior B team. Then I think there was 15 or 16 of us moved up to the junior A team, so the name was still there. And then eventually it just stayed with me with all my friends.
Do you remember going up to my old hometown of Rouyn-Noranda to play in that juvenile tournament up there? For us, it was like the Toronto Maple Leafs had come, and you guys were lights out fantastic in that weekend event.
Yeah, you know what? I hope my memory is not distorted, but we won the tournament, and, we won like 10-0, 11-0. We won going away. I remember having my first beer in my life there, and I didn't like it at that time. And how do guys do this? And But it was a great tournament for us because we didn't go too many places where we slept over, and it just sort of cemented that, hey, we got a special team here, and I firmly believe we did, and it was a great tournament for us.
You grew up skating in your dad's backyard rink. I mentioned George Bell Arena. Let's talk about your dad, Norman. And in the book, you said Norman Boudreau stood 5 feet 2 inches tall, but he was a giant to me. Obviously, those memories still hold strong.
Absolutely. I mean, you know what? There's so many memories of him. But one of the greatest things they did is, like, he worked at Dun & Bradstreet, which was right across from Maple Leaf Gardens. Mm-hmm. And his biggest thrill every month was his boss would take him to the hot stove for lunch. And but what I noticed, we didn't make a lot of money or anything like that, but he was the one parent that always volunteered to drive anybody's kid anywhere to any practice arena. And I just thought that, when I got older and I became a parent, I just thought that was so special that my dad probably had less than financially than anybody. And he would drive from downtown Toronto, pick me up, put my bike in the car, go to baseball, to hockey. And he was always there, never missed a practice, never missed a game. And he was my support staff. And I remember every time I get in the car, he would never yell or scream, or if I had to just say, "What did you think you did? How do you think you did? what could you do better? He kept asking me questions until I answered my own questions. And it really was a powerful moment for me driving home from practice, whether it was baseball or hockey, with my dad.
Your mom, Teresa, was a bank teller, but I know in the book you talk about how tight things were financially for the family. 1973, you're in your first Memorial Cup. It's in Montreal. It's not far away. Your parents couldn't afford to go and watch you play and win that incredible championship.
No. I mean, they couldn't afford it, and I obviously didn't have the money to back them up back then. But I mean, I guarantee they were the first ones listening on the phone, looking for results, looking for the radio to see if it was on the radio, and they were my biggest fans, and they cheered harder for me than anybody. And I mean, I think there's I'm not in this the only one in this boat. I mean, almost every hockey parent that I've met that has kids will do anything for their kids, and my parents were no exception.
You played for a great guy in George Armstrong, and what a coach Chief was with that Marley team. Now, it was a great Marley team, but I think maybe his greatest attribute was he let you all play. Did it feel that way where you guys maybe ran the show, even yourselves, given all the talent was there, and George made sure that everything was supervised properly?
He was an amazing man, or he still is an amazing man. I mean, and yes, he did let us, people used to laugh and say, you know what, we'd have practice, and for the first 40 minutes, it would be like sticking puck and just playing games and everything else. And then he'd probably put 10 or 15 minutes a day of practice in that we really had to buckle down, but we had to do it perfect. But people only remember the shinny that we played and that he participated with us and everything like that. But I learned so much from him in my coaching career, as from him of how he treated people, and he treated the players so well that he was fair. He punished us when things weren't going good, but I'll never forget that we lost a game one night, and we were all upset, not because we lost, but because we lost for Chief. Chief was the guy that we were more worried about than ourselves. And when you can, as a player, when you can do that and the love for your coach is that great, you're not going to lose a lot of games.
Story that stands out for me, Gabby, is the 1973 final. You're in the Montreal Forum, and George is nervous, obviously, and in between periods, he's got to get a dart in the stick room, except he gets locked into the stick room. Incredible, but you guys didn't miss a beat regardless.
Well, when he finally got out, and Danny Lemlin, he was banging on the door, and when Danny Lemlin opened up the gate and he came back out, we had scored 2 goals. And he just laughed at us and he says, "I'm going back in. You guys are doing better without me." He was a guy that was didn't want to take any credit, but deserved all of the credit that he did get.
It was the heyday of junior hockey. I grew up in Noranda, as mentioned. The Montreal Junior Canadiens in the late 60s were outdrawing their parent team at the Forum. And you guys were certainly doing great in the early 70s at Maple Leaf Gardens. I recall taking the train downtown to watch you guys play. There were 10, 11,000 fans at Maple Leaf Gardens.
On a regular Sunday afternoon, we played at 2. I mean, there was a minimum of 10,000 people there. And we used to get the same kind of coverage that the Leafs got right now. I mean, Frank Orr used to be the Leaf, and John Iaboni were the Leaf scribes, so to speak, for the Star and the Sun, and they did our games too. They were the same 2 reporters that covered our games, and I mean the Globe covered us as well. And there was nights like on Monday morning when the Leafs hadn't, or either on the road or didn't play, we were getting all the ink in the front page of the sports pages. I mean, on Sundays the Leafs got it from Saturday night, but the Marlies were an awful big thing back then, and up till 75, you could play till you were 21. I mean, there was no 18-year-old draft. There is what I'm saying, and so the 21-year-olds that were still eligible to play in junior, that in today's world would have been in the NHL at 18, were 3 years deep into their junior career, like a Dennis Potvin or, the guys we had, Paul Boudreau and Bob Daly and all of those guys. So the caliber of hockey was exceptional. I just can't believe how good the hockey was back then. And every team had tremendous players. There was no really weak sister, except maybe in the early years, the Sioux and Sudbury.
Yeah, you mentioned Paulie Boudreau's brother Christian lived across the street from us on Chadburn Street in Aranda. We can go on, but he was a god up there. You also at that time get a chance to play with Mark and Marty Howe. Heck, Mark was the youngest Olympian in the 72 Sapporo Games at age 16, and the Marlies get him. Do you have a Gordy and Colleen Howe moment that you recall in terms of them around the team and those great runs to the championship?
I have a couple, actually. I mean, Gordy would come, when Detroit had a Sunday off, and whether they played the Leafs maybe on Saturday night, he would stay and watch the game on Sunday. And I remember him one night, I went down and I stayed on the ice. Okay. And after the game, he came right over to me, didn't say hi to Mark, didn't say hi to Marty, grabbed me by the chest, lifted me up, because me and Mark were pretty tight. We went to practice all the time. And he said, "Don't you ever lay on the ice again. You never let the other team know that they had a chance to hurt you, and you're better than that." And so ever since that day, unless I'd had the wind knocked out of me when you can't move, or I was really, really hurt, I made it to the bench. And it was just something back in the 70s and earlier in those days, that you just never let the other team know that they had gotten advantage over you. So that was one great moment where you just looked up at Gordy and you just said, if Gordie Howe tells you to do that, you're doing that. I mean, another moment was in the summer, me and Mark were pretty close. Marty was a year older, so he had his group of guys to hang around with. But Mark invited me to Detroit for the weekend. And so I went to the weekend, and I remember waking up Saturday morning and going, and then Colleen was cooking breakfast, and everybody was there. And Mark says, "Dad, we'd like to go to the ball game today. The Tigers are playing the White Sox. Could you get us a ticket? Do you have tickets? Whatever." And he says, "Hold on." And he gets the phone, and it's a landline, and he just dials up the number, and he says, "Al, can you give me 2 tickets for today?" And I said to Mark, "Who's he talking to?" And he said, "Well, that's Al Kaline." I said, "Al Kaline? He's talking to Al Kaline and getting us tickets?" And I was over the moon. It would be like somebody talking about Mickey Mantle at that time. And we had tickets, 2 seats right behind the dugout. And and Mickey, who was playing? Mickey Lolich was pitching. There was 50,000 people there. And it was an awesome memory.
And the best hot dogs in the world. We're going to, one more story here about the Marlies. And this is something John Anderson talking with us when he was coaching in Atlanta. And we had some time after the morning skate, and he was grateful to see all this Toronto media. A bus trip, obviously, you guys had lost, I think, in North Bay, the Sioux, stopped into Sudbury where you had lost. And I think Chief's mom was making a bunch of sandwiches for you. And you guys are having a bit of a good time in the back. And Frank Bonello, the general manager, gets up and just berates you. Do you remember that and what Chief's response was to that?
You know what? I really don't.
Nah. The whole bus erupted. You know what?
And that would be because Frank was again a great man, but George would make fun of him all the time. Him and the assistant GM, who was Jack White at the time. And every time they said something, George would be behind their back, either giving them the na or having his finger in his ears and going like that, sort of try to make something that was a very serious moment be not so serious. And I could picture John laughing with his laugh and thinking that was the funniest thing in the world.
Your book details, obviously, the triumphs, but there was extreme disappointment in being drafted in the 3rd round. Gabby, you're expected to go somewhere in the top round, and you guys have some fun. Prior to the draft, you got caught streaking, which seems pale by comparison when you think about what's going on now, but it might have impacted where you were picked overall by the Leafs, wasn't it?
I really believe it was. I think there's a couple factors, but I mean, the funny thing was I had never done anything like that. Our whole team, it was like we would go out after every Sunday game as a team, and you don't realize that how close your team is 25 or 30 years later until you realize that everybody on the team always went out together, and two guys would always do streaking. Okay, and this was the time when they were doing it in 1975, and I would never do it. So that one time when we won the Memorial Cup, I did it, and we got caught, and we got it was in the front page of the Toronto Star, and blah blah blah. It was just happened to be 2 weeks before the draft, and the funny thing, that the most disappointing thing, it was a phone draft that year. There was 2 years that there was a phone draft, and the thing is, we had a Leaf party the week before, and John McClellan, the late John McClellan, pulled me aside and said, that I was had a great year and everything, and that the Leafs were drafting 7th that year, and that they would pick me, but they didn't think I would be there. And I went, oh wow, that was awesome. Then the next night, I went out with my agent, Bill Waters, and he said he'd talked to California, or the Golden Seals, and they had me 3rd on their list. And so expect to go in the top 5. And then the streaking occurred. I never thought anything of it. And I didn't get a call. If the draft started at 11 o'clock and I didn't get a call till 1:30, and I remember from Alan Eagleson's office, and the secretary phoned me and said, congratulations, you were drafted in the 3rd round. And I hit the floor. I was so devastated. I cannot even imagine, knowing me, and what I would have done when I was watching, if I had been watching like they do now when the kids go to the draft table, and I would have been up there. I would have been bawling after the 10th pick. I just know the way I am, and that was pretty disappointing, quite frankly. And it's unfortunate, because if things had changed, and I love the way my life has gone, and I've been in hockey for now 45 years professionally. So I mean, not bitching about it, but things that could have changed. I definitely wouldn't have gone to the WHA, and I would have probably had a chance to start my career with the Leafs a lot earlier if I was drafted quite sooner. Or so I mean, but those are the things that I did it, owned up to it, and wish I could take it back, but it happened.
Yeah, you've mentioned as well that the game came easy to you, and it may have impacted the way you trained and impacted the length of your NHL career. But if there's a positive in all of this, it affected the way you coached in the National Hockey League, coached in the American Hockey League, and all the way through from Mississippi onward. Your attention to detail was certainly much greater than it was when you were an active athlete, I think.
Yeah, and you know what? I remember, I couldn't recall what 2 and 2 was in school, but I could recall everything that happened to me in hockey. And I used to always want to talk to the coaches to find out what their thoughts were and why they did the things. And I really took everything from the good of what I thought the coaches that I had were, and threw my personality into it and knew how I wanted to be treated. And I think that really helped with me with my coaching. And you talk about details. I mean, back in the day, in the early in the 60s or in the 70s, I had a coach by the name of Bill White, not the hockey player, but he coached me in Markham, and he had every detail to the last minute. He was the Roger Nielsen of junior B hockey. And I mean, he'd have things where you weren't allowed to pass the puck to the defenseman if you're up by a goal in the last 5 minutes. And I'd ask him all these questions. Why are we doing all this? Why? And he says, well, the puck could bounce over their stick and it could give them an easy breakaway. So you keep everything below the crease, and little details like that, and so many more that just resonated with me and stayed with me. And I tried to use them in my coaching philosophies. And so when you pay attention to the details and you do the right things, good things usually happen.
coaching experience. I recall Pat Quinn, we're in Ottawa, and Steve Sullivan has 2 busloads of family and friends coming down from Timmins to watch him play. The year before, 98, 99, he has scored 20 goals. And Steve's having a bit of a good season, but he'd had a couple of rough games. Pat, he did not even dress me. He was a healthy scratch. The 2 Irishmen the next day get into a major FU session, and Pat promptly puts him on waivers, and Steve goes on to a great career in Chicago and beyond. Take me back to your Moncton days and Eddie Johnston doing somewhat similar to you, but at least you were on the bench, stapled to it, and your dad had come all the way to Halifax to watch you play.
Yeah, he had gotten on the train, and he went 24 hours to Halifax, but Eddie didn't know this, and he was trying to teach me a lesson, and sometimes I got too big for my britches and thought things again were easy, and I think I was leading the league in scoring and that. And he sat me down, and he was making a point that I was going to dress, but I didn't play a shift. And he saw my dad waiting for me after the game. The only difference is Eddie came up and apologized like he couldn't apologize any more than he did. And it was something that I'll always remember, and I take it into my coaching. And like, if I know somebody's parents are going to be there, it was mostly in the minors and stuff, that I would never sit them out. I would never not play them. I would do my best to make them look as good as they could. I mean, it happened a little bit once in the NHL where I didn't do it. That was this year. Ryan Donato's mom came to see him for the first time, and I didn't know this until after the game. And I too went up to her right after the game and apologized and said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know, but we were trying to get something accomplished, and it was Ryan's turn to sit, and that's the way things were." But I'm really cognizant of who's in the stands for the kids and the parents and everything else, because I think it like, to me, it was a crushing blow that my dad came this far and didn't get a chance to see me play when he couldn't come on the road ever because of his job and that. I figure I'm pretty average of what other people think. So, I mean, I would think that the other players would think the same thing. So I tried not to do it. You live and learn. And these are the things that from playing to coaching, that I learned that stayed with me.
You mentioned Roger Nielsen. He's one of the major coaching influences in your life, along with Andy Murray. And of course, we've talked about Chief as well. The initial introduction to Roger when you were playing for the Leafs had to be cold. I think you mentioned in your book, he didn't look at you or speak to you for 3 months.
It was so cold. Like, you have no idea. Like, I had separated my shoulder in camp that year. Okay. So I didn't come down for, I came down, and Roger was the one that told, it's hard to believe this now, but he said, "You're living with this guy, you're living with that guy." He sort of dictated the roommates. And my best friend was Paul Evans at the time, but he wouldn't let me live with him. He made me live with Alain Belanger, who didn't speak a word of English, and I didn't speak a word of French. And so, but I wanted Roger to like me so much, but he hated the Marleys so much. And I would sit the second seat behind him, and he would talk to Paul, and like me and Paul would sit together, but he never once would talk to me. And I had to really beg and really earn my way into Roger's heart. I think I did. And again, talk about a guy that pays attention to every little detail you do. But I mean, I had a great year because of Roger there, and he helped me be a more complete player. Because when I got called up to the Leafs, it was always as a fourth line guy, so I better know how to check. And Roger taught me how to check and how to be that kind of guy. And I could see where Doug Jarvis got it from all those years ago in Peterborough.
We've got to talk about your time in Johnstown, and of course, the making of Slapshot. I just watched it again the other night, and you were +3 or 4 in the one game I saw early on in the movie. I just see number 7 blazing across, and then out of the corner, you could see a guy with a little handheld camera. I froze it.
But what a great movie. You made $1,300 for 14 days work. Looking back on it, I know you thought maybe you should have been back playing, I think in Minnesota at the time, but it must have been fun mingling with the likes of Paul Newman and the rest of them.
I would never have thought. I mean, it was made in 1976, I think, or 77. So, you take 40 plus years ago, would never have thought that that movie would become the iconic movie that it became.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fun. And I was quite a ham at that time. And I remember George Roy Hill, in the scene you're talking about, said, okay, we're going to show how Charleston is getting scored on all the time and how bad their team is, because this is pre-Hansen time. So he says, I'm going to just film the goal and the goalie moving back and forth. So all I did was skate in the crease, around the net, around the net, around the net. I never, like, we were playing from the blue line in, but not once did I go anywhere other than in front of the net, just so I knew the camera would be on me. So that was a fun part. Meeting Paul was a fun part. The memories of just how a movie was made, not knowing anything about it, was a fun part. So it all just comes into, I mean, was it should I have been there? I mean, it was a bad decision for me to stay there and want to do the movie, but it is what it is, and it's part of my history now.
Paul used your apartment. If we're ever to go to Johnstown, do you remember the address of that abode, Bruce?
No, but I remember what it looked like. You had to walk upstairs, and then there was a door. And I remember when George Roy Hill came into the dressing room, he says, listen, I need an apartment for a scene with Paul Newman. Who has the messiest room in the messiest apartment? Everybody stood up and they all pointed to me like I just murdered somebody. And so they said, okay, let's go, kid, we're going to your apartment. And that was it. They moved it all around, but I'm proud to say that Paul was lying in my bed. And again, when I talk about the movie, I keep telling people that was my apartment, and it's just a funny story.
You played a season or part thereof in the World Hockey Association in Minneapolis, St. Paul, playing for Harry Neal and Glenn Sonmore. I remember Harry telling me a story where after a game, they're flying out commercial with bags of money from the concessions just so they could pay off the players. How crazy was that time in your limited time playing in Minneapolis, St. Paul?
Well, I was there for 33 games. I think they folded at the 40th game. I missed the first 5 or 6. Me and Paul Holmgren actually were in Johnstown, and we got called up. He signed with Philadelphia. I got called up to Minnesota. And again, my non-knowledge, I guess, we were in Cincinnati, and they said this was our last game. And so when you get your paychecks, make sure you cash them. And I waited too long, and there was no money left in the bank when they gave me my check. And that was the last time. I never rushed to the bank after getting a check right away. And you had the likes of Mike Walton, Davey Keon, Johnny McKenzie, all getting their money, but little Bruce, who needed it more than them, didn't get a penny.
Mississippi Seawolves, you get a chance to coach down there, and you win a Kelly Cup with a slight goon trend to it, Gabby. I just hockey DB'd it. Kevin Evans, 505 penalty minutes. Roger Maxwell, 276. Simone Olivier, 230 penalty minutes in 38 games. And Stephen Cool-Ewell, 209 penalty minutes. Your fans must have loved it, though.
You know what? I think I'll take credit for that, in that I went down there and knowing that they never seen a hockey game. Nobody in Mississippi. So how are you going to get their attention? You better be tough. They're going to enjoy the fights, and they want to see your team win. They didn't know how you won or whatever. And the number one team in the league at that point was the Louisiana Ice Skaters. And they were drawing 10,000 people a game, and they had nothing but toughness. Mm-hmm. They were the toughest team, like in the Federal League, basically. And so I knew we had to get some guys that, A, were going to be colorful, that the fans could attach themselves to, and B, that they could play a little bit. And those guys you mentioned were all good players. I mean, Kevin, I knew from Paul. I knew him from years and years. and he was the toughest 5'9" guy in history. And I still think he holds the penalty minute record for all of hockey for most penalty minutes ever. And Roger Maxwell was 6'4", 230 pounds. I remember watching him in training camp and saying, you know what, when you're fighting, you've got to fight to want to hurt somebody. I mean, you can't just fight to hold on like this. So the first game we're playing Louisiana, he puts 2 guys in the hospital. And he comes up to me, coach, he says, was that good enough? Did I hurt them enough? And I went, yeah, Raj, stay away from me now. But I mean, toughness sold down there. They loved it. We averaged almost 8,000 people a game. And they still talk about it. We had a reunion actually last year for the Kelly Cup champion team, that about 500 people from Biloxi came into the casino, and we partied all night. It was really cool.
You coach in the Kings organization in Manchester, and we've got to talk about 9/11, and you lost your dear friend Ace Bailey and Mark Davis as well. How close were you to going on that flight, and just a twist of circumstances prevented you from actually being on that flight?
Well, I mean, it was close. I mean, I went to Lake Placid. Bill O'Flaherty's daughter was getting married on the Friday. I was supposed to leave on the Tuesday. So Andy Murray was there, Dave Taylor. We were all at the wedding, and at the wedding on the Friday, Andy said, "Listen, I want to change your ticket to Monday because I want to have a coaches meeting before camp to make sure we're all ready for camp." And I said, "Sure." So he phoned up our flight guy and changed my flight from Tuesday morning to Monday morning. And I went with Ace, who was from Boston, just picked me up. And I said, "Why don't you come too? Just come on Monday." And he couldn't get his ticket changed. As a scout, it was too much to change it at the time. Mm-hmm. So he didn't get a chance to change his ticket. And obviously Tuesday was the 9/11 day. And I mean, I was scheduled on the same flight and everything with them. And I would have, it's crazy how the world works and how God has different ways. And when it's your time, it's your time. And when it's not, you're not. But I luckily dodged a bullet there. And with ever since that day, every year, I've had a coaches meeting and a coaches dinner before the first day of training camp. I don't know why, except other than the memory of that it saved my life.
I had an opportunity to cover the Marlies in Hershey in 2016. It was my first trip down there, and boy, oh boy, was I smitten with that community. And I know you and your wife, Crystal, obviously are as well. What's it like going to Hershey if you can't get to the National Hockey League just yet, given how big a deal you guys are to that whole region and just what a franchise they are? And of course, the history of Calder Cups speaks for itself.
Well, it's the NHL of minor leagues. I mean, for a town of, the initial town has 25,000 people in it. There's Hummelstown, Palmyra, a few other, Elizabethtown around it. So probably in a community that they draw of about 100,000 people, but you can go in the grocery store and they know who you are. You can go in a restaurant and people will come up and ask you for your autograph and everything else. Unlike any other minor league team that I've been in, and they take the history of the Hershey Bears is as much a statement there as anything. I mean, it's not only a great little town, it's a great town to bring up your family. And I mean, actually, we've moved here, as you know, this is where we're living right now. And we just think that there's, they treat the Hershey Bears like any team treats the National Hockey League. And I thought it was a really eye-opening time when I got the opportunity to coach here.
You win a championship, you get to the Calder final the following year, and then the year after that, Glenn Hanlon's demise gives you an opportunity to finally go to Washington. You must have been just wondering if and when this was ever going to happen, and what did you have to do to finally get a look at the top level?
Well, I didn't know what I had to do. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, in the minor leagues, I had never missed the playoffs. We had consecutive 100-point seasons in Manchester, I think 4 of them in a row. We did the same in Fort Wayne and the same in Mississippi. So when we were in Hershey, we won the Calder Cup the first year. We lost in the finals to the second year, and only, quite frankly, because Carey Price got beat out of junior and got to play goal for Hamilton at the time. But that's water under the bridge. But I didn't know, in that summer after that second year, I'd signed a 4-year deal to coach in Hershey, and it was the longest deal I'd ever signed in my life. And my biggest thing, when I got called up, obviously it was ecstatic, but I remember about all the interim coaches, the guys that get called up, it's usually for a year and then they find somebody else. My only worry to George was, hey, do I still have my job back in Hershey when this thing ends? And he said, yes, for sure. So I believed him. But unfortunately for me, we just started winning right off the bat. And we won. And then we ended up going from dead last to first place and won the division. And I think that sort of cemented the fact that I was going to coach there next year. And we did the same thing. And then the third year we had 121 points. And I think that was the season that sort of I said to myself, geez, I can coach in this league now.
Brilliant coach. You had much success, 8 100-point seasons, mentioned Jack Adams Trophy as the top coach in the league. But you're going to be remembered for your time in Washington and the outdoor game and that tirade inside the room with the F-bombs flying left and right. And you just become one with the camera, but you were just speaking from the heart and you got the message across. But Mom, 4 feet 11, Teresa Boudreau wasn't pleased. What do you recall about being sort of disciplined once that bit of video had hit the airwaves?
She didn't go to work for 2 days. She was embarrassed.
She was.
And she said, that's too much swearing. What are you doing? You can't do that. And it was funny because I knew that I knew I was being taped. They would put a mic on me at 6:30 in the morning and follow me through the whole day till 5 or 6 at night every day. And when I went into the room for that tirade, it was I wasn't really upset. I didn't start. I just started building. And when I start building, I don't know what's coming out of my mouth. It just flies out. But I mean, I told I asked the cameramen to leave and they said no. And I said, oh, okay, here I go. And we were in the midst of a 7-game winless streak at that point. I mean, we had never lost. I mean, 4 of them were ties. We'd gotten points and 3 losses. We ended up losing that game too. So I mean, it was funny because Pittsburgh was on the midst of a 10-game winning streak. So the actual show was perfect for this. I mean, the losers against the winners, and we went on to win after when we finally did win 10 or 11 in a row, including that the game on January 1st. So it was quite a thing because I've done coaches clinics, and every time I go with Jim Ralph, he starts off by putting that 42-second clip with all the F-bombs and they're counting them, and he says, then he'd always say, well, here's a quiet guy, and then he'd introduce me, and it was great.
Before we go, a couple of questions. I guess the hockey school in St. Catharines didn't go last summer?
Well, nothing went. You know, I mean, it's unfortunate because we had 320 or 330 kids signed up for the week, and I know my kids worked really hard at it, and for it not to go was it was tough. I mean, because they count on it, but it's going again this year. To be our 38th year doing it, and Ben and Andy work very hard at it, and so does Brady. I mean, he works there, and it's a real family type thing. And Brady has one in Minnesota where the other boys come, and Ben has one in Belleville where Brady goes, and I think he's having one in Fort Wayne. So the hockey school is just, and Andy does hockey clinics all year round in Banff. That's what he does, and it's funny how the game itself has taken the Boudreau family, and every summer, every winter, and this is what we do. Hockey's in our blood, and I don't think it'll ever leave.
Ben, of course, is the head coach of the Fort Wayne Comets. We're going to end it on this. Your name was bandied about a lot in Toronto in the summertime, and there's much excitement for we in the media when we heard that possibility, because you've just been so great with us over the years. Obviously, you're not done just yet, but it's got to be tough sort of sitting around, hanging out, knowing what you've accomplished, knowing what you know, and knowing that you're ready to go if given the green light.
Well, I'm trying to make everything possible that if anybody calls me, I'm ready to go. There's by no stretch of the imagination do I feel like I'm retired or want to be retired. You know, it's I'm as anxious for hockey to get going as anybody, and not only for me, but for the game itself. I mean, you know, for all these years we build up the game to be as international a game as it is, and I just think it with A, the pandemic, and B, it not going, nobody really knowing at this date when it's going to start, that I think it only hurts the game. And I worry more about the game than I worry about me working. But I certainly want to work again, and I hope I get the opportunity at least one more time.
Well, his is a career that has spanned 6 decades, from his first strides on the ice to those many paces taken behind the game's benches. 17 teams as a player, another 9 as a head coach, a passion that burns just as bright today, aptly describing our guest, Bruce Boudreau. Gabby, thanks for this.
Hey, it was a lot of fun. I love going down memory lane.
You're listening to The First Question with Paul Hendrick, brought to you by Ballistic Sports. Follow Ballistic Sports on Twitter @Ballistic Sports.